But seriously, when it comes to these types of hacks, it gets people thinking again, okay, what do you do to protect your business and yourself from legal ramifications down the road of being hacked? And that's where our guest comes into play, attorney Shawn Tuma. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
And the firm that you're with again?
Scheef and Stone in Dallas and Frisco, Texas.
Excellent. Well, I mentioned the other night I lived in Frisco for a while. So.
Well, it's a great place.
Yes, it is.
Like crazy.
Yeah, I noticed the Dallas Cowboys are taking over half of Frisco. So,
absolutely, I can watch the new Jerry World from my office window.
Jerry World. I forgot all about that. So, from the standpoint of these hacks, as an attorney, what goes through your mind when you've got a client that obviously is going to have legal issues if they get hacked and their data is compromised?
Well, the first thing that's so interesting about this area of law is it's one of the few areas where the victim of the attack becomes the bad guy for allowing it to happen. And that's what we're seeing here. You know, we see in most of these cases where it's a company or an organization that is attacked by someone trying to do harm to it. And then that victim company, it becomes the one that's blamed for it and is castigated throughout the news and the media and everything else.
Well, case in point, you had Target here, which got hacked through, I think, a vendor party that they were working with. I want to say it was an HVAC or something, and through a phishing email that the vendor had an employee's computer plugged in somehow into Target's, that's how they weaseled their way in.
That's exactly right. Fazio Mechanical is the company that led to the Target breach. And interestingly enough, when you read the news reports on this issue, it appears they used a similar spear phishing kind of email to gain access initially to the DNC's network.
So explain what a spear phishing email is. I don't think a lot of people exactly know what that is.
That's basically the emails that we all get that have something, they're deceptive. Essentially, they're using deception to try to make a human being click on them or download them. They pretend to be someone they're not. They pretend to be a FedEx package for delivery or a PayPal account that needs to be updated.
Yeah, or an invoice that's unpaid and there's threatening language with it. You've got to deal with this now.
Absolutely, and you click on it and you open it, and then all kind of bad things are happening, whether you know it or not. Many times you don't know.
Yeah, until it's too late.
Exactly.
So,
and
how do you help pick up the pieces then for this victim who then, like you said, becomes the bad guy or gal?
Well, once the breach has happened, then what you do is you do what the DNC has done here, and you bring in forensics experts and people who have the tools and the equipment and know-how to try to look backwards and figure out what exactly happened, who did it, what did they access, what did they take, and then you use that to determine who you have to give notifications to, remediations to, provide the monitoring services, things of that nature. And during that whole process, you've got to try to repair the vulnerabilities while you're trying to figure out what happened. And you usually have to do that within hours or at the very minimum a day or so.
I work as an independent contractor and pretty much a full-time voiceover actor performer. And from time to time, I'll get a client that I work with that will send me an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. And I'll actually take the time to look through it. And some of them I've noticed, and I have to send it back and go, look, either you drop this or I can't work with you, because they'll actually be asking me to assume some of the liability should my email get hacked and the correspondence that's been going back and forth between me and them that might contain proprietary information for a product or service or a technique or something that they're trying to create a voiceover project for could get out and thus could damage them or whatever. But I mean, we're talking like boilerplate that's in the tens of millions of dollars of potential liability.
Yeah, this is very common. And we're seeing that now with any company, any organizations, and individuals that are exchanging data or that have digital, data connections. And this is a product of that Target breach in a lot of ways when the FTC came in and recognized that Target was attacked through a small little vendor that no one had ever thought about. And so they put forth some guidance saying you need to make sure your people you do business with have adequate security, and you need to allocate that risk through the contracts. And that's exactly what you're seeing in these agreements. And it's crazy what kind of liability people are asking for. And what's even crazier is how many businesses I see where they think, it's the CFO of the organization. He says, well, we don't do data stuff with this company. I'll just sign it and move on, not realizing what they've just agreed to.
Yeah. You suddenly put yourself on the hook for, a hack that could happen a year or two from now.
Yeah. I mean, I had a case a year ago where it was a small little vendor working with a worldwide food manufacturer, and they wanted the little vendor to assume liability for any breach they had anywhere, regardless of whether they caused it or not. That's just saying you're out of business.
Yeah. Wow. Well, when we come back here, I'm kind of curious what your legal advice is for going forward relative to, is there insurance that you can buy to maybe help mitigate or protect yourself should this happen to you? And also, where you see this maybe heading down the road with regard to the power of hackers, because I've also run across a rather disturbing story with regard to artificial intelligence that I'll add to the conversation when we come back here, where that could be heading. We're visiting on WCCO with attorney Shawn Tuma, who specializes in cyber and data security law and advises clients around the world. It's Moose Miller sitting in tonight for Jordana Green on WCCO. Tell you what, the DNC's got a problem because the Russians apparently hacked their computer server and accessed the party's files on Republican candidate Donald Trump. So will we see some of that leaked out? Who knows? Moose Miller sitting in tonight here on WCCO for Jordana Green, but it's provided grist for our mill when it comes to, okay, if you run a business or if you're concerned about your data and stuff getting hacked and then you get sued because of that, or you get pulled into a lawsuit because an email exchange between you and a bigger company, your email got hacked and it contained some of that other bigger company's valuable proprietary stuff, you could get pulled into a lawsuit. And that's where our guest, attorney Shawn Tuma, joins us. Is there insurance that you can buy or add to your coverage that can help protect you?
Absolutely. There is a whole new market, and I say new. It's been growing for many years, but now it's really coming into fruition of this market for cyber insurance, which is designed to cover many of the types of cyber risk that are now excluded from most of the commercial policies that people have.
Really? Is it expensive, or how does it work? Do you know?
Well, that's all a relative term. It's not very expensive in comparison to a lot of other forms of coverage because the insurers are still trying to figure out how to gauge this risk and how to properly account for it. But it has been increasing substantially over the last year and a half or so.
Sure. And does it kind of work kind of like $1 million umbrella policy kind of thing, or?
Somewhat. It's more specific in what it covers.
Okay.
And certainly in what it excludes. There's a lot of exclusions in there that you have to be careful of.
Such as?
One, you mentioned if your company is subject to a lawsuit based on a contract you have with another party. Many of these policies will exclude contractual liability. So if it's a liability, arising by virtue of the contract, they may exclude it. Or
well, what happens if I sign an NDA? Is that a contract?
It depends. Yes, it is a contract, but it depends on how the liability arises by virtue of that contract. If it's a first-party claim or a third-party claim against you,
wow.
That's a tricky one. But the one that people really need to be on the lookout for is social engineering coverage. because the vast majority of all these hacking events that we hear about are not a code-based hacking as much as they are social engineering, which is just making good people do dumb things by deceiving them. And a lot of these policies exclude social engineering.
Really? So give me an example of social engineering.
The most popular one right now is what's called the business email compromise. And that's where someone will spoof like a high-level executive's email account from an organization and will send an email to someone in accounting and say, look, I'm getting on an airplane. Here's a private deal that we have going. Nobody knows about. You've got to wire $100,000 to this account before I land in Japan. And when I get there, I'll call you to make sure you did this. Now go do it. And then the people will get the email. It looks like it came from the boss.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Then they are wiring out millions and millions of dollars.
How common is this?
Very common. This is the most common threat that's getting publicized right now across the U.S. by the Secret Service and the FBI.
Wow. What are some other ones that you can share with our WCCO listeners?
One of the most common we mentioned, the spear phishing emails. Another, people will call in and ask for information and just start fishing around little by little to gain knowledge and to learn passwords. In the case with Sidney Blumenthal with his emails, they guessed his passwords because he had information on the internet saying, they gave him a clue to it.
Interesting.
We have tons of social engineering going on. It's just tricking people.
All right. Well, I wanted to finish our conversation with something I'm pretty sure you're aware of, especially in your line of work, Counselor. I just read a story about artificial intelligence relative to hackers employing it. You hear a lot of talk about people going, well, when computers become sentient, they're going to realize that, or software becomes sentient and aware of itself and can kind of think as itself, that we're going to be the threat and it's going to come after us. Well, no, the bigger concern should be using artificial intelligence for hackers, that they can create super smart viruses that think, or stuff like that actually thinks and learns as it's trying to hack its way in at 1 trillion calculations a picosecond.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a huge threat. One thing we've learned throughout the history of hacking is if something has a chip or a processor, hackers will hack it, and no matter what it is. And artificial intelligence is going to be a gold mine for them, because what we see overall right now is we will learn the threats, and then hackers will adapt and change. Like Sun Tzu taught, thousands of years ago, adapt to your enemy. They're adapting. When they can create artificial intelligence-driven malware that will do that, it's going to be crazy.
Well, that's where I worry about, okay, you could really do a concerted attack on Wall Street, banking, international finance.
Yeah, and terrorists have tons of money to put at this, and they would love nothing more than to hurt our economy, and what better way to do it than attack Wall Street with something like that, which means we've got to have the good guys working just as hard and staying just as much ahead as they are.
Oh, sobering place to kind of end this conversation, but one that we'll probably in our lifetime be talking about.
I think so, very quickly.
Well, don't say that. I hate to hear that. Shawn, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank
All right,
you.
head on over to the Stonebriar Mall for me, right?
You better believe it. I love that place.
Well, as somebody who used to live in Frisco, enjoy, and thanks for spending a little time with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
It is 10:30. I'm Moose Miller, sitting in tonight for Jordana Green here on WCCO.